Hi, I'm Scott Jenkins, Managing Member of Alexander Accounting, Payroll, and Tax. Having worked as both an auditor and tax professional for prominent CPA firms, and eventually working for my own clients, I have witnessed many effective and ineffective strategies small businesses use to manage their accounting records. With this in mind, I hope to share several good ideas which will make you more efficient, better organized, and in more control of your business. Thanks for watching, and visit www.aaptservices.com to view this and other helpful videos, as well as to learn about services we offer which may be of interest to you as an individual or a business owner. Today, I'll explore 3 possibilities which I have grown to like for those do-it-yourself clients. Although most small business owners using any of these methods should still consult an accountant and tax professional at least annually. Near the end of this video, I'll provide a few reasons why. Method 1 is for those who just don't want to use a computer and prefer paper methods of record keeping. As you'll notice, I have a picture here of an 8-columnar pad. You can purchase this pad or one similar to it from Office Depot or several websites on the internet. You can purchase it with varying number of columns. The version I'm showing you here is an 8-column page. Once you open up the tablet, you'll find pages that look like the one being demonstrated here, which I've already taken the liberty of pre-completing for us. On day 1 of each month, you'll want to start a new set of sheets. Each month may require more or less pages than the month before, but what I found easiest for clients is setting up a single set of sheets with all possible expense categories and making copies of the blank pages for use each month. In the columns all the way to the left, you should establish one column for each possible or at least regularly used payment method. As you can see, I've set up one here for my Capital One checking account, which is a personal checking account, my Synergy business checking account, and a business American Express credit card. Note that you'll want to include payment methods for anything which could be a business expense or something that could be used towards your individual tax return. Second, you should write your business expense categories in each column heading, moving on to a second or third page if needed. As you'll note, I've recorded several common ones for demonstration purposes only here. I have advertising, utilities, liability insurance, building insurance, telephone. If we scroll on to the next page, you'll see that this page, the business expenses continue. I have internet, rent, auto supplies, and so on. Notice I also like to place a prominent line separating major categories. As you'll see, I've placed a line between the payment method and the business expenses, as well as between business expenses and the next category. This just simply allows for easily distinguishing between different categories of expenditures. After all business expense categories are established, write the heading identifying them as such with a line indicating where they start and end. This will help your accountant in being certain of what your intentions were. You'll note here I have business expenses with a line indicating where those expenses end. On the prior page, you'll see the same thing at the top. Next, you'll want to write common personal expenditures which you may want to consider claiming on your tax return. These could include things such as property insurance, property taxes, medical expenses, home repairs, donations, tuition, school supplies, and the list goes on and on. Just as before, you'll want to identify them with a heading and arrow or line indicating where they start and end, just as you had done for the business expenses. Lastly, you can place a column for miscellaneous items or items that you just don't know what to do with. As you see here, I have them entitled Ask My Accountant. Even if you weren't sure an expense has relevance to your tax return, but your gut's telling you it may, keep track of it until your accountant tells you it is no longer necessary to do so. Be sure to place a description of the purchase so your accountant can properly classify it. Finally, you will record all transactions in full under the payment method column. In other words, if my entire transaction or purchase was $1,354 in this instance, then that entire amount will be recorded under the method which was used to pay for that transaction. Any purchase could potentially be broken down into several expense categories. So the idea is to record expenses in appropriate columns which would total to the payments column. As you'll note in my first transaction, which is check number 1027, which was paid by my personal checking account in the amount of $123.55, a portion of that payment was $100 attributable to liability insurance, and $23.55 of it was for my building insurance. If you add these two amounts together, they should always equal the total of the payment. You can obviously use this method for more than 3 expense categories. You may have 4 or 5. Typically, most payments consist of 1 or 2 methods. You see, I've provided a couple examples here, and as you'll note, some of them continue on to secondary pages. You'll see that the pages come pre-numbered, so transaction line 4 on page 1 corresponds to transaction line 4 on any subsequent pages. So these two items are recording the payment on line 4 of page 1. You may even want to take it a step further. For transactions which were not miscellaneous or you were uncertain about, it may still be beneficial to write in the notes column maybe who the vendor was and the date of the transaction. It is important to note that if you choose this method of bookkeeping, your accountant will still have to summarize these transactions for you after reclassifying your miscellaneous items and a review of your recordings. However, this organized method makes it much easier and therefore cheaper to have your accounting data compiled for tax preparation over the average disorganized client who either brings in receipts or notes scribbled on a page. Your accountant will love you for being so organized. The next method I'm going to show you involves using a spreadsheet designed in Excel, a sample of which can be located on our website at www.aaptservices.com, and it helps you record like transactions on separate pages. Visiting our website, if you click on the Resources tab and scroll to the Bookkeeping section, you'll find the spreadsheet here, Bookkeeping Taxes Template. This spreadsheet basically serves as a summary of all your business activity for the year. Note, there's separate tabs at the bottom. Each page helps you record various like items. For instance, there's a tab to record income items. There's a tab to record supply purchases, licenses and permits, insurance and other fees, miscellaneous expenses, office expense, travel expenses including a vehicle mileage log, home office deduction. Although this is not my preferred Excel method because there are easier ways to summarize data, this method can be beneficial to you, the client, for tracking additional information which could prove useful in the event of an audit. If my spreadsheet does not have all the categories you use, you can simply copy the tab most similar and paste it for a new sheet which can be relabeled. For instance, if I copied this tab to a new tab, be sure to check to create a copy, and you'll find a second version of it here. And you can rename this one to whatever you are keeping track of. Even if you prefer the next method that I demonstrate in Excel, as do I, there are still two sheets here that can be useful. The travel expense calculator helps you record required data relevant to travel and entertainment. It's basically a vehicle mileage log. Tab for home office deduction. This is helpful for those that have a dedicated portion of their home for business use and identifies the common elements that need to be tracked for taking full advantage of the deduction on your tax return. The final method I am demonstrating is the simplest and perhaps requires the least amount of work from a competent accountant, thereby saving you money. This method simply requires recording a few headings and then filling them in as you incur expenditures. As you note, here's the headings for my columns that I've created. I have a payment method dollar amount, which is basically the full amount of a check or credit card purchase. And then I'm going to break each purchase into its relevant expense categories. So if my $1,000 purchase was all $1,000 medical, there would be no second expense for this line item. This one transaction in particular, 900 of it was for medical, but 100 of it was donation because it was to St. Jude. Note I've also recorded the date of the purchase, and I've included a section for any relevant notes. Lastly, you'll notice this zero sum check field. Simply what it does is help make sure that you don't make any careless errors. If I break a payment of $1,000 into multiple expense categories, this simply says 1,000 minus expense category 1 minus expense category 2. It should always equal 0. That basically tells me that I've recorded the full amount of the purchase in my expense categories. If you ever receive a total other than 0, you'll need to recheck your math. Although here I really only have expense categories, you could technically even record your revenue here. Basically, I'll record something to business checking. We'll assume we received $1,000, and we'll call this revenue. And $1,000. So now when you provide this document to your accountant, he has a total accounting of all transactions, both on the expense side and revenue side. If your purchase needs to be split between more than 2 expense categories, simply highlight the column after expense category 2, right click and choose insert. You can do it twice and add expense category 3 and expense category 3 dollar amount. Note that just as in method 1, the notes section would be particularly helpful if you have items that you aren't quite certain about. This description can help the accountant identify things that may not be so obvious to you. For instance, this transaction for $2,000, most people would probably record this simply as $2,000 worth of supplies. But if I realize that from your note that 1,347 of it was from a computer, well, truthfully, that's not supplies. That's considered a capital asset, and it has a different tax treatment. So making notes with each of your purchases is always a good thing. If you sent this file as it presently is to your accountant, he or she would simply use one of several quick methods to summarize the data. I will show you a few of these summarizing methods just in case you need to know where you stand in the middle of the year. However, it's not necessary for you to do this, and I recommend that you make a copy of the file to manipulate if you're not quite computer savvy. The first thing you can do to summarize your data would be to filter and sort it, which basically groups them together. But this will not provide totals of each expense category. What do I mean by filter? So if I highlight row 4, and I come to the Data tab, you'll see the little button here, Filter, which I've also added as a shortcut up top because I use it quite frequently. If I press Filter, I can now come to any of these columns and quickly sort it, or even hide transactions I'm not presently interested in seeing. So if I only wanted to see my business checking transactions, I've not deleted the other transactions, I've just simply hidden them for short term. Now I'm looking at all business checking transactions only. Hitting select all returns the other items right back as they were before. So possibly I may want to sort by expense category at the end of the year. So you'll see that I basically these were test transactions. I've recorded them each 4 times just to have something to summarize. If I came out here to the right and did the auto sum, provides me with a quick accounting of the balance for advertising for the year of $800. Although I don't recommend this method, it's too manual for me. Sorting the data was always a good idea, to group them together. My preferred method for summarizing the data and giving me totals for the year involves using a feature called pivot tables, or you can even use a pivot chart if you want a visual representation of your expenditures for the year. To create a pivot table, you can simply highlight the area you're looking to summarize, go to the Insert tab, Pivot Table. You can choose Pivot Chart, which will both create the table and a visual representation through a chart, or you could just do a pivot table. I'll do a pivot table here real quickly. It's asking you which data are you summarizing. Everything that's in blue. If it's not selected correctly, I could re-lasso what data I am seeking. And I'm going to tell it, keep it in this Excel workbook, but I do want a new worksheet so that I don't mess up what I'm looking at. So over here it's created tab or sheet 5. And this will be my pivot table once I've defined it. So real quickly, I've already done this beforehand, but basically I checked off expense 1, which is the title of the expense, and expense $1 amount, expense 2, and expense $2 amount. What this is basically going to do is going to give me all of those fields to include in different locations. I recommend placing expense 1 and expense 2 in this axis category, and the sum of expense 1 and sum of expense 2 in values. Upon completing this, it may not be set to automatically sum. It may be set to count. So if I change this to count, it would likely show me 4 transactions for most of them because I recorded them each 4 times. But I'm not interested in a count of the transactions. I'm interested in a sum of the transactions. So as you can see, advertising expense, spend $800. So this is a quick method, and also I've asked it to provide a visual representation by utilizing the pivot chart. Note my original data is still fully intact, and everything that I've done here in this pivot table tab has no effect on my true data. Another neat thing about pivot tables is now that I've summarized it, let's say I want to look at what transactions consist of this $800 balance. Double clicking it actually creates yet another new tab with only those transactions. And yet, once again, if I go back to my original tab, it's all still here for me to continue recording new transactions and to provide to my accountant. I can always delete sheets that are no longer needed. Well, I hope one of the 3 methods demonstrated helps you. If you still feel overwhelmed after watching this video, perhaps it's time to call us and we can inexpensively record your data and provide meaningful reporting to you so you always know where your business stands at any time. Understand that hiring us to perform your accounting has advantages that often pay for the service. As we record your transactions on a regular basis and maintain regular contact with you, our knowledge of your practice becomes more intimate, and we are able to better understand and recommend measures to save you money at tax time. It is important to know that most businesses and individuals classify transactions inappropriately, and many leave out important information. If you self-prepare your tax return or even use a non-accountant tax service with inexperienced, untrained employees who are simply answering questions in a software program, you should reconsider and visit a professional accounting practice at least annually to review your transactions and reclassify them where needed. Most importantly, professionals can help you identify what you are missing. I hope you have learned from our video, and until next time.